Hi all, I am back, and last time I talked to you guys I was talking about a white elephant Christmas gift exchange, and I was originally thinking I was going to knit a shawl for somebody, but honestly I don't think I have enough time. But the wonderful thing about the friend that was planning this whole entire event, she was very good about having people list detailed stuff about hobbies and other things, and I remember the friend actually was kind of getting into embroidery, and I thought to myself, why don't I make her a needle book for her to store her needles and maybe some embroidery floss, other things, and just like a nice little thing to keep it. So that basically spurred the idea at 2 in the morning when I couldn't get sleep about making a quilted needle book. So this enabled me to kind of look up how to put the correct settings for my machine on for quilting, free motion. And so I was able to quilt a small amount of some cute fabrics I found in my stash to use for this project. And I did a leaf motif across this fabric that you see that I'm quilting right here. And once I pretty much quilted up a large enough size to kind of fit my intended book, I then decided to cut it down into about, as you can see, an 8 by 5.5 inch rectangle here. And there you can kind of see the leaves that I've quilted onto this fabric. And I'm just tracing out the shape, and then I cut it down. And it's very slow. Yeah, cutting it down. And then after that, I then just kind of stitched the edges down on it to make sure that the quilting kind of didn't start fraying on that piece. So I'm just putting the correct foot on my machine back on and switching out my thread, and then taking that rectangle that I cut down and just sewed kind of around the edges to make sure that they didn't fray. Here I'm just marking some important points. So I am marking the halfway of the book where I'm going to be attaching my leaflets, my fleece leaflets where you can stash your needles. So I'm doing that, and then on the front side, on the outer side, I'm marking the middle where I'm going to be placing a ribbon to help tie the whole entire booklet together once she's storing it. So I'm doing that there. I'm also marking about 1/2 inch away from the edges, so that way I don't stitch my outer ribbon all the way across, and then I can put my binding around the whole entire edge without it getting stuck. Here I am cutting a 3 3/4 inch by 5.5 inch piece of the outside flower fabric and some inner white fabric to actually make a little pocket on the inside of this booklet so she can stash anything from scissors to some of that floss in there as well. Once I cut that inner pocket piece out, I'm now sewing along the 5.5 inch side, just doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that. And then I'm going to iron that open, the seams open, and then fold it over and press it so I get a nice looking pocket piece. Here I'm just checking to make sure that that pocket isn't going to be interfering with where I'm going to be stitching those inner felt leaflets for the needles. And I can easily slide my hands in to retrieve any thread or scissors I might be stashing in there once this is all sewn together. And it seems to be working pretty well. Of course, once it's stitched down, it'll have better give to grab items out of it. Once I completed that, I then cut a 2-inch strip of binding fabric to kind of nicely make some binding to go around this whole entire booklet, and I chose this cute little green polka dot fabric for that. And here I'm just pressing it in half and getting it ready so that I can sew it onto the booklet once it's ready to go. And then here I finally made a trip to Joann's and I was able to grab some of that lace that I wanted. So I just am putting some Elmer's glue down, and then I'm going to use a weight because I can't iron this lace. It's pretty sensitive to heat, so I'm just using that to help it dry in place. And once it's in place, I stitched it with kind of a cute decorative stitch, and so now it's nice and securely put onto that booklet. And here is some coral colored felt that I'm using for those leaflets within the book. So I'm cutting them at 6 and 4.5 inches. I'm using two book leaflets for this. So 2 rectangles are being drawn out. And then I'm going to cut them out with some pinking shears. Also, for reference, that pen that I'm using is actually a heat pen where basically if you heat it, it will disappear. So I just lightly went over it with the iron, barely touching it, and it disappeared. Once I cut those booklet pieces out, I then am taking those and sewing a nice solid stitch down the center of those in the center of the booklet. So a nice stitch where I'm locking in those stitches at the top and bottom, and then sewing along that middle center line that I drew originally. And here I am just checking to make sure that pocket is going to fit nicely without interfering with those booklets being moved back and forth. So there I am gluing again, and then I'm pressing with some heat onto that to make sure it sticks and doesn't move when I stitch down the binding onto the circumference of this whole entire booklet. I'm also going to pin these lace pieces kind of towards the center of the booklet, so that way I don't accidentally sew over them when I'm adding on that binding around the edge. And here we are kind of coming into the home stretch. I'm just stitching that binding around with a little less than 1/4 inch seam allowance, and just kind of adding on just like you would with a regular quilt, making sure that you kind of fold up and over to make sure you're not accidentally sewing over those edges. Just making my way around that whole entire booklet. At this last bit here, I left a few inches and then kind of did a little pinching and draw out a straight line to make sure that it laid nice and flat before I cut those seams. And I'm going to iron that down, and then we will finish off the sewing on the binding with the machine, and then I'll be using some hand stitches to fold that binding over and secure it to the inside of the booklet. So as the last stitches go into that outer binding with the sewing machine, we'll then be able to take that outer binding and then kind of fold it towards the insides, and I'm just making sure it's going to fold nicely without me having to trim too much off of it before starting to work. So as you can see, I didn't sew over my leaves in there because I had them at a good enough size where as I did the binding around it, it would miss sewing those leaflets. And here I am taking my needle and thimble and just slowly working my way around the whole entire inner binding of that booklet and just sewing it down and securing it. And at that point, the whole entire booklet should be about finished. So here's the finished booklet. As you can see, you can have a nice little bow tied in the front of it. And as you can see, I'm trying to do this one-handed, so it's a little hard. Please excuse the very shoddy filming of this. But once you open it, then you can see that there are kind of 4 pages of felts where my friend can stash her needles for her embroidery. On the back, you can see the quilted leaf design of that outer book part. And then here in the front of the booklet, you can see I have that nice little pocket that has a nice finish, so it shouldn't fray or anything. And it's pretty nice and big, so you can throw your thread and scissors in there. And so that's just a basic little booklet that I made for my white elephant gift exchange this year. Thank you for watching.